Welcome into another episode of Always Talking Ball. Tyler Noe, Lance Barton joining us today, former Michigan quarterback, co-host of Crain and Company, a man of many talents because he's a budding country music artist. David Cohn joins us today. Welcome in, David.
Thank you guys so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, Dave, we appreciate you joining us, man. We can't have you on, man, without at least talking about Michigan, talking about Big Blue. And something that I personally think was a huge deal for them was the hiring of offensive coordinator Chip Lindsey. I'm from the state of Alabama originally, and he was a big-time high school football coach during that time in the state of Alabama. Actually coached Nick Mullins at Spain Park there in the Birmingham area. And then he ended up coaching Nick Mullins at Southern Miss when he was the OC under Todd Monken, who's currently with the Ravens now. He was the OC for Gus Malzahn at Auburn. In 2017, Chip Lindsey's offense was the 8th team in SEC history to pass for 3,000 yards and rush for 3,000 yards. And obviously, he was very successful in North Carolina with Drake May and that bunch, one of two teams in the country to pass for 300 yards per game and rush for 190 yards per game. So obviously, with Sharon Moore, they're going to run the rock. They're going to be Michigan. They're going to run the football. But bringing Chip Lindsey in, you got to think that they want to be balanced, and they wants to bring that balance that he's shown with other offenses and with new quarterback superstar Bryce Underwood, and bring that balance to Ann Arbor. What's your thoughts on that hire, David?
Yeah, I'm so glad that you brought up the balance, because so often people think about this air raid term and they don't think about a 3,000-yard passer and a 3,000-yard rusher. And Omarion Hampton there at North Carolina is another name that I think that you could certainly bring up. One question, though, before I keep answering this, talking about offensive coordinator, when was he at Spain Park? Do you remember?
He was there. So I graduated high school in like 2008, and it would have been around that time, kind of in that 2008, 2012 range.
Okay.
The
only reason I ask is,
yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, the only reason I ask is because, Neil Caudle was coming out of Spain Park in my years, and we threw together at a lot of camps. We threw together at Auburn and at Louisville and possibly even at Michigan. And obviously, he was one of two quarterbacks that year to commit to Auburn with Steven Ensminger. But if it hadn't been for me going to Auburn's football camp that year and throwing for Tommy Tupperville and for Al Borges, I probably wouldn't have ended up at Michigan, because there were some high school coaches down there that called Scott Loeffler and called Lloyd Carr and said, hey, you guys should get this guy up for a camp. So I knew Neil Caudle pretty well in the Spain Park area. But just getting back to your point here on Chip Lindsey and everything that he's going to bring to Michigan, obviously, a lot of us are really excited to see what the dynamic is, just because Michigan under Jim Harbaugh had set this blueprint. And even before Jim Harbaugh, I mean, when I was playing at Michigan under Lloyd Carr and some of those offensive coordinators that I just mentioned, look, man, we want to run the football first. We want to impose our will on you, especially late in the season. I mean, if you're coming to the big house in late October or November, we want to impose our will on the ground, and then we're going to beat you off play action and try and get vertical off of that. So I think that all of those things we're still going to be capable of doing, and hopefully there's just an added dynamic with Chip Lindsey and the Michigan offense. What I don't want to have happen is, like a year ago at this time in the offseason, offensive coordinator Kirk Campbell was saying, well, we're going to be the most dynamic offense that Michigan has ever seen. And then not only were you not that, it was almost the complete offense. Now, or complete opposite of that. Now, I was a quarterback on several teams with Rich Rodriguez when, I wasn't the style quarterback that he wanted, and we as a quarterback group got blamed for a lot of those losses. And I know it's never entirely one position group's fault when you don't perform how you want during a season. So I'm not laying everything at the feet of Michigan's quarterback play a season ago. There are many factors, especially when you're coming off the heels of a national championship team. You send so many players to the NFL. Your head coach, Jim Harbaugh, also goes off to the NFL. But at the same time, they were anemic in many respects, and you beat the eventual national champions 13-10, right? And so I think the Wink Martindale, maybe you're going to get to this, but the Wink Martindale of this piece of this puzzle here at defensive coordinator, and the way that they're going to be able to rotate with the depth, particularly at the defensive line, but also having Rod Moore back, like that's going to benefit everyone there involved, including Chip Lindsey calling plays, and especially if the youngster Bryce Underwood is going to be the starting quarterback, which that sounds like how we're going here.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that, because kind of what you're hearing. I mean, Mikey Keene's there, obviously transferred from Fresno State. He's the more seasoned guy, but obviously Underwood's got, a mass advantage there with the talent. But I look at that first month and I look at road games, at Oklahoma, and at Nebraska. Those are tough places to play for anybody, let alone an 18-year-old freshman quarterback. I don't care how much of a phenom you are. Like, those are tough places to play. So do you think they do maybe a 2-quarterback system for the first month of the season, and maybe Keene provides some of that leadership and some of that seniority in those road games?
Look, we talked to head coach Sharon Moore here on Crain and Company at the outset of spring practice. And I didn't ask him, hey, who's going to start at quarterback for you, right? That would have been a dead end question. But I did at least want him to be on record on our show of breaking down what his process is for determining a starting quarterback. And having played the position, and I have to say right here, the first week of August, there are many aspects of the game that I really miss, okay? Not being locked up in a hotel room during the month of August right now is not one that I miss so much, because fall camp is hell, and it's hell for a reason, because you are trying to see what your football team is made of, right, before you start this season, which is such a grind and it's so grueling. And so he talked a little bit about that. He talked a little bit about how he's going to evaluate quarterbacks in spring football. He talked about how he's going to evaluate these quarterbacks throughout fall camp. And the biggest thing for me is if you're Mikey Keene, you're coming in from Fresno State, you were injured during spring practice. And so I know a lot of people probably just saw Bryce Underwood go out there and be the physical specimen he is, and say like, well, there's no way he cannot start at quarterback with how much money the university's paying. I promise you what, Sharon Moore is going to play the best guy, especially when he is going to his alma mater week 2, going on the road to Norman, Oklahoma to play the Sooners. He's going to play the best guy. I just don't know if Mikey Keene's going to be able to make up that ground in fall camp that he's already yielded by being injured, and it's no fault to himself. But at the same time, look, if he comes in and he's crisper than Bryce Underwood, and he proves that he makes the right play at the right time, even if he doesn't throw it as far or as hard, then he will probably be the starting quarterback. I don't see the 2 platoon system thing happening. I think that Bryce Underwood is going to win the starting job, and he'll be the starting quarterback. And if not, Michigan fans shouldn't be disappointed in that. That means that they brought in a transfer guy, if assuming that it ends up being Mikey Keene, or one of these other guys wins the starting job. Again, I played in a system where Ryan Mallett came in the year behind me, and there's so many people who just, anointed him the backup to Chad Henne before he even got on campus. And that ended up being the case, but he won that job. Right. It wasn't like the rest of us weren't fighting. All of us had an opportunity to be the starting quarterback at any time. These coaches are going to put the best players on the field. So what is the ceiling for Michigan if it does turn out to be a true freshman quarterback in this league and in this country? That's tough, right? But at the same time, I've seen other true freshman quarterbacks not just lead their team to double-digit wins, not just make the college football playoff. We've seen some instances, rare instances, where they've actually led their team to a national championship. And so is the rest of the roster at Michigan good enough for that to happen this year? That's a question all of us are really excited to see answered.
Well, David, a side of the ball that absolutely is good enough to compete for a championship is that defensive side of the ball with Wink Martindale. And Pick Six Previews has Michigan like top 15 in all 3 units for this coming up year. I mean, they lost a couple of studs, like Kenneth Grant, Mason Graham along that defensive line. But we saw in that bowl game, in the Alabama game, other guys step in and how nasty that defense can still be under Wink Martindale. They're getting a guy back like Rod Moore, who missed 2024 and was all Big Ten in 2023. They've got guys at the linebacker position. They've got guys at all 3 levels that are studs. We know Wink Martindale is one hell of a defensive coordinator. Is it just status quo with this defense right now, that it's just next man up at Michigan, and this defense is going to be as nasty as what we all think it's going to be this year?
Well, I hope so, particularly the way the season ended last year. And I'm glad you talked about all 3 levels. And let's just break it down here. When Wink Martindale got on campus, and you start with Texas early in the season last year, I think it was week 2. I was at that game. I was in the big house. Steve Sarkisian, Quinn Ewers roll into town. And whatever Steve Sarkisian wanted to do against Wink Martindale's defense, he did it. Okay. Yep. Particularly with leveraging what I saw is the stiffness in the linebacker group, and those guys were just getting lost in coverage. And Steve Sarkisian's already one of the best play callers in the country, and he just had an absolute field day. That game was over very quickly. And I was a little bit confused as to Wink Martindale's pressure strategy and when he was deciding to blitz guys, particularly with how talented the front four was. At the same time, I'm fully willing to admit that Wink Martindale's forgotten more about football than I'll ever know. And down the stretch of that season, you saw them really figure it out, right? And granted, Mason Graham did play against the Buckeyes. So when you say like, well, they held the eventual national champions who were scoring points at any clip they wanted against most of the teams in the playoff, they held them to 10 points and beat them 13-10. Mason Graham was in there two-gapping a lot of stuff and, had a great game. It reminded me of a 55 I played with by the name of Brandon Graham. But you brought up the bowl game against Alabama, and this isn't some just one-off, Pop-Tart Bowl or something. Alabama's starters were playing in that game. They had a point to prove because they had just missed out on the college football playoff. It reminded me a little bit of Georgia and Florida State when Florida State had gotten left out of the playoff, and Georgia just absolutely sent a message to the rest of the country. We're going to beat them as badly as we possibly can, and they did. Well, I thought that maybe Alabama would come in with that same mentality, and it was really that Wink Martindale-led defense that shut Alabama down. I think there was, 3 or 4 turnovers in the first 6 snaps that Jalen Milroe had or something. So, and that was all with the 2 deep guys that you're talking about. And so, of course, there's a lot of reason to be optimistic coming into the beginning of this season. Now, when I hear things like this past couple of weeks that Michigan's going to rotate 10 men on the defensive line alone, that gets me real excited because that's a lot of depth. Does that necessarily mean that 10 guys are going to be better than just 6 if 2 of them are Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant? I don't know. Maybe those other 2 guys were so great you just can't replace them no matter how many guys you have. But rotating 10 guys on the defensive line, you're clearly going to add depth. I think the linebackers, like we were talking about, they figured something out towards the back end of the year. Wink Martindale was putting them in better positions, and those guys are going to return. And then, like you said, in the secondary, while Will Johnson was an incredible talent, he missed a lot of football games last year, particularly the end of the year when that defense was really showing out. And Rod Moore, coming off the ACL injury, was a captain even when he was injured. Like, that's the type of presence that you want in your secondary. And so I think there's reason to be very optimistic about Michigan on the defensive side of the ball. And we're going to get to find out early because that week 2 game against Oklahoma is such a great litmus test. And we have a few of these across the country. I can't get this Texas A&M Notre Dame matchup, which might be the same week, out of my head because that's a great litmus test. We're going to see one with the Buckeyes in Texas and with Clemson and LSU. Well, this Oklahoma-Michigan matchup is one of those for many reasons because I don't think a lot of people who may just be Big Ten fans or may just be Michigan fans, I don't think they understand how good the Oklahoma roster is and how well they retained some of their talent and then brought in guys in the transfer portal. This Johnny Mateer kid at quarterback, I think, could be one of the best quarterbacks in the country at the end of the year. And you bring in someone like Jaden Ott at running back. And we just sat down with Oklahoma general manager Jim Nagy, and I point blank asked him, like, how healthy is Jaden Ott? A guy who would have probably gone in the first or second round a year ago, even with the knee injury. And Jim Nagy said he's 100% healthy. So that zone read coming at you with Johnny Mateer and Ott for a full game, Michigan's going to need to lean on the defensive side of the football, and I think that'll be a Wink Martindale game, and we'll get some answers early in the year.
Can't talk about Michigan without talking about little brother. No, I'm not talking about Michigan State. I'm talking about Ohio State. It's been over 2,000 days since – I know that the Buckeyes fans are going to love that. It's been over 2,000 days since the Buckeyes scored a victory over the Wolverines. Obviously, though, national championship last year. Michigan got them in 23. Ohio State's losing a lot this year. Obviously, that defense was loaded. I think they lose 8 guys off that defense. They're breaking in a new quarterback as well. Seems like the rest of the country is breaking in new quarterbacks. But just kind of, looking at the other side of the rivalry there, what's your outlook? We're kind of the idea of like Ohio State's going to reload no matter what. But they're breaking in a new offensive coordinator, which Brian Hartline, talented wide receivers coach, heck of a recruiter. Matt Patricia on the defensive side of the ball. Like, we can't just let those things go and just assume that it's just going to be all smooth and gravy for the Buckeyes this year, right?
100%. And I just have to, again, just a little bit higher perspective here to begin, because you have to understand my affiliation, especially on the Michigan side of this rivalry, didn't start until they recruited me, right? Like, I'm from South Georgia. And so until I commit to them in 2005, my only affiliation with this was my mother's from Columbus, Ohio. So her entire side of the family are Buckeyes fans. It goes without saying, I hadn't heard from them in some number of years. That's just how deep this rivalry goes. But since I began my affiliation with this rivalry, it's been fairly one-sided. I mean, the Buckeyes have just kicked Michigan's butts, including when I was there and after, and it pretty much ruined every single Thanksgiving. And they were starting to set themselves as the gold standard in the conference, when Michigan had been that for a long time, or at least both programs had gone back and forth. So the 4-game win streak now is, I'm not going to lie to you guys, is absolutely incredible. And you find a way to beat them in years where you're legitimately better than them for the first time in a long time. I mean, that's the 21 and the 22, and Jim Harbaugh's making the college football playoff, but he's still losing to Georgia. Or, you're supposed to beat TCU, but we're still losing to TCU. So we're getting over one hump, but not the other. And then all of a sudden you beat them in a year where you go 15-0 and win the national championship. And then Sharon Moore's able to beat them in a year when they are the national champs, and Michigan is 7-5. So you've beaten them in so many different ways with so many different records these last couple of years, that I think that is sort of starting to seep into the psychology down in Columbus, especially when you're able to talk about like an entire class of guys, right, who have yet to beat Michigan. So that's that side of it, just from like a semi-recent historical perspective, is that the rivalry has benefited because the onus was on Michigan to show up and say, hey, we're not going to let the other program just absolutely run away with this, because it is getting embarrassing, right? Talking about this year specifically, I mean, the Buckeyes are still going to be really, really great at every single position. Like you said, you still have 5 stars running around all over the place, and they've shown the ability to reload and lose guys to the NFL draft every single year. The two most important factors to me are, one, a lot of people are going to talk about Julian Sand, and they should, because until we see him do it, right, like, you have to see him go out there and be the type of player that he was recruited to be. Number 1 overall recruit, was going to play at Alabama, flips his commitment when Nick Saban announces his retirement, and he's going to be a Buckeye. And from what I hear, he's as good as advertised. He might be a first-round pick one day, right? Or number 1 overall pick. But we're all excited to see what he's capable of doing. I think the more important point that you brought up is the change at both coordinators, right? And look, I played against Brian Hartline. I met him at the White House actually a couple months ago. He was a nice guy. I know he's going to be able to call great plays, but Chip Kelly, when you needed it most, was able to go to a place that not many people are able to go to. Yep. During the season, I run a segment here called Huddle Up, where we break down the play of the week. And it seemed like Chip Kelly was a candidate every single week from some of the stuff that he was dialing up. And then on the defensive side of the ball as well. I mean, I get that Matt Patricia coached in the NFL and was an NFL head coach, but at the same time, you're losing one of the best defensive coordinators, and he's going to a program that maybe for the first time in a while has a better roster than what Ohio does in Penn State, which is pretty wild to say. And I think that dynamic is going to be very interesting, particularly with the Nittany Lions going to Columbus this year. But with all that being said, they're still going to be really, really good. And when it comes to that last game of the year, both programs starting younger quarterbacks. I mean, if you don't think the Buckeyes want to beat Michigan as badly as they possibly can this year, then I don't know how to help you.
Yeah, awesome, guys. Appreciate you guys all listening. Follow us on our socials: Instagram, TikTok, X. Subscribe on Apple, Spotify, YouTube. We love hearing from you guys. For David Cohn and Lance Barton, I'm Tyler Noe. Take care. Have a great rest of your day, and we will see you next time.